Welcome everybody to a lunch hour edition of a Garden Club virtual program. This is Horticulture Corner, and we have a fantastic program on foodscaping with Beth Marlowe. I would like to introduce myself. I am Denise Reagan. I'm Executive Director of the Garden Club of Jacksonville, and I'm here with Damian Lamar Robinson, our Operations Manager. Hello, Damian.
Good afternoon, officially. Hello, everybody.
Right. And we can't do programs like this without the help of the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, whose support is making programs like this possible. So we're very grateful for that. And I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Beth Marlowe has a master's degree in environmental science. Prior to becoming the urban garden coordinator at the Duval County Extension Office, she worked as a biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. She has served as a Duval County Master Gardener volunteer for 5 years. Beth, we're so happy to have you with us today. Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, fantastic. And I want to just remind everybody that if you have questions throughout the program, use the chat function to type your question into the chat. And we'll stop a couple times throughout the program and cue your questions up to Beth. And then there will, of course, be some time at the end as well. So please use that chat function so that we can get as many questions to Beth as possible. But before we start, we always love to do a little poll. And so I'm going to pull up today's poll, which is, how much do you know about foodscaping? I've never heard of it, but I'm intrigued. I've got some ideas, but I need some help. I grow vegetables, but I never thought of making them part of my landscape. My yard is full of beautiful and delicious plants, or other. And you can type your answer in the chat. And we're getting lots of votes in. And we'll give it another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end the poll, and Damian, tell us how people.
All right. So we have 52% of you said that you got some ideas, but you need some help. I'm one of those people. We also have several of you that said you never heard of foodscaping, rounded off by a good portion of you that haven't grown vegetables, but never thought about making them part of your landscape. And some of you have beautiful landscaping, foodscaping already happening in your yard. So I put in that I'm actually just getting started, and one of our other members put in that she's a backyard gardener. She has a couple raised beds, and she's looking to move things to her front yard where the sun is. So and incorporating some plants as well, some vegetable gardens. So one other person also mentioned that they've done some container gardening, but they will have an opportunity to have a garden pretty soon.
Fantastic. All right, Beth. Well, now that you have a little bit more information about your audience, take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your lunch hour with me today. I hope that this little talk will give you not only some information and inspiration for growing food for future lunches, but also maybe some food for your soul, because I don't know if you're like me, I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling uncertain about so many things that are going on today. So I can think of nothing better than to spend an hour talking about gardening and then getting out there and doing it myself. So thank you for talking gardening with me. I really love it. Okay, before we really go too far, we want to be sure we all understand what we're talking about when we say foodscaping. What does that mean? Well, the definition that is on the slide is my interpretation of Bree Arthur's definition. She's one of the leading proponents today of foodscaping, and she calls it the logical integration of edibles into your existing ornamental landscape. And the keys here are that it is intended to be visually appealing. It does follow basic landscape design principles. it will comply with your HOA or homeowner association regulations if you have those. It is not just sticking in an edible plant here or there willy-nilly wherever you happen to have an empty space. It is not just having a vegetable garden or a vegetable bed and saying, okay, that's my foodscape. I mean, those are good things, but that's not exactly what foodscaping is. And I wanted to contrast it a little bit also with permaculture. Permaculture is kind of a mishmash of permanent culture or permanent agriculture, and that really goes way beyond what foodscaping is, beyond just plants and beyond creating an aesthetically pleasing landscape with ornamentals and edibles. So we're kind of in a middle ground there. And why are we talking about foodscaping right now? Well, did you know that the average suburban home in the United States has a foundation landscape that's approximately 1,250 square feet? And if you divide that by 32, the size of your average raised vegetable bed, that's 39 4 by 8 foot beds. So if you think about it, that's a lot of space that we may or may not be using as efficiently as we could. Since COVID too, in the spring, when we suddenly found ourselves at the grocery store and not able to find some of the things we were used to finding, you know, a lot of us are more interested in, hey, how do I make sure that I have those specific vegetables that I really want? And we're also oftentimes more interested in understanding how our food is grown and making sure that it is either organic or meets criteria that we have for health. And then environmentally also, it can help us make sure that we're reducing the food miles that our food takes to get to us. And it can also save us money. Now, it doesn't always save money, but it can if we're smart about how we do it. Foodscaping is not really a new idea. It's our latest sort of incarnation of an older idea. If you look back through landscape design literature, there is some evidence that foodscaping to some degree or other has been going on for eons, at least since the Assyrian and Babylonian cultures in Mesopotamia. Potentially also the Egyptians and Persians, and those would have been gardens that were for pleasure but also included edibles in a pleasing way. Some writers would say that certain phases of English cottage gardens may also be an example of foodscaping, although when I spoke to an English friend of mine recently, she said that at least since World War II, that was not her experience with English gardens. They tended to be separate because a lot of times vegetables required different growing conditions and were often grown in greenhouses rather than in the regular garden. French potager gardens are another example. That is mingling specifically of herbs with ornamentals and some fruits and vegetables. And then even in the early American colonial days, there is some evidence of ornamental and edible gardening being mixed together. This picture here in the top right corner of the slide is actually the lower garden at Mount Vernon, George Washington's home in Virginia. And it is primarily a vegetable garden, but you can see just from this picture that the way it is landscaped and laid out, it is not just a row of vegetables. It is a very thoughtful design and ornamental and pleasing, as well as being very practical. So really, when it comes right down to it, a beautiful plant is a beautiful plant, and the distinction between ornamental and edible is one that we have kind of imposed on the plants ourselves. It is true that in some cases when we are growing primarily for edible purposes, we may harvest things along and along in ways that may make the growing habit not quite as pretty. But if you just look at the plants themselves, many of our vegetable plants are really, really beautiful. You'll see on the left Swiss chard leaf. In the center, you have a Listata de Gandia eggplant, which is one of the small Italian eggplants, and that's also an eggplant flower. There's really nothing more beautiful than a lot of our vegetables. So it reminds me of something I heard a long time ago. I was listening to some improv comedians being interviewed, and they were talking about what makes improv work. They said the key thing to remember is no matter what the other person says in your skit, never respond with no or yes, but. Always respond with yes, and. And I think of that as kind of a metaphor for foodscaping, because you are not saying or thinking to yourself, oh, I really love that eggplant, but I'd really like to plant that Swiss chard, but you're saying, ooh, I really love that Swiss chard and my ornamental landscape, and I'm going to mix them all together. I'm going to figure out a way that is both pleasing and practical.
As somebody who's been doing improv for several years, I love that analogy.
Yay. Okay, so foodscaping does follow landscape design principles. So you're starting with that thoughtful design. That is your foundation. And you're going to plan this out, ideally on paper, or if you are more computer oriented, you could do that with some kind of landscape design software on a computer, I'm sure. You're going to follow the same kinds of principles. You're going to use a variety of textures, colors, sizes, and heights. You're going to use a lot of repetition in your landscape, because that always makes everything look better. You're going to unify with a color theme or scheme. And I probably should have put this at the beginning, but be sure of your goal. You know, what is it that you are trying to achieve with this landscape? And it may change over time. You may want to do this in phases. You may want to start with just one bed on one side of your house and work from there. I do always recommend, whether it's straight vegetable gardening or foodscaping or any kind of gardening, start small, because I have worked with several community gardens and homeowners, especially since COVID hit, and everybody was really excited to get their vegetable garden started, and they tilled maybe an acre and a half and started planting, and then realized, I can't take care of this. What am I going to do? So start small. All right, let's move on. Brie Arthur, in her book, The Foodscape Revolution, which some of you may be familiar with if you are a Master Gardener volunteer, there was a book club for Master Gardeners throughout the state of Florida on her book, and that's kind of how I got to know a little bit about her, but you can buy the book for yourself. She has some useful concepts for how to think about this. One, you're going to use your existing ornamentals as a framework. Unless you just really hate your existing ornamentals, then you can rip those out and start over. But for most of us, we're going to be starting with our ornamentals as our foundation and framework for the edibles that we're going to put around them. And those foundation ornamentals around the house, a lot of times for us it's ligustrum or boxwood. They're often not super exciting, but they are very hardy, they're very low maintenance, and they're evergreen, and that's a really good thing to have as your backbone or your backdrop for a lot of your edibles, which may or may not be evergreen and maybe changing more regularly. Another thing she talks about that I think is very helpful is zones. If you think of the landscape foundation as your zone 1, that's closest to your house, and that's where you're going to focus most of your edibles.
1 second. If you are not muted right now, please mute yourself. Thank you. Go ahead, Beth.
I've got to unmute myself. So zone 1 is where you're going to focus most of your effort, and it's easier because you're closer to it. You're going to be right out there in it every day. Zone 2 is kind of your mid-yard or any other beds that you have already that are not right there next to your house, or any that you might put in. And then zone 3 is your along the street, or maybe between the sidewalk and the street, what sometimes called the hell strip, very hard to garden in often, or along the sides or back edge of your property. So those are the ones you're furthest away from, and they're the ones that you are going to spend less time in. You may also have less access to water in that zone. So we're going to focus first on zone 1 and then work our way out. And as with any ornamental landscape, you're going to have the same components in your foodscape. You're going to have annuals, perennials, borders, ground covers, shrubs, trees, and containers. And if you don't have a big yard, don't worry about that. A lot of this you can do either right around your porch or patio and in containers, so you do not have to feel left out at all. So we are at our first stopping point for questions.
Sorry about that. I had a little technical difficulty there, but let me get back to that.
That's okay.
Everyone still see the screen?
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
All right. So Damien, have we had any questions at this point?
Yeah, so far, they're asking if there will be slides available for us later. And actually, this entire presentation will be on our website at GardenClubJax.org shortly after this meeting.
That's right. And we'll also have Beth's slides, which have some links in them, and that will be uploaded to our site as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, then we will continue on. Beth?
Okay, so I thought we could proceed with all of those different landscape components that we just saw in the last slide, but get to know what some of our edible options are for those components. And this is the first one I wanted to highlight because it's kind of a new one to me and maybe to all of you. But this is cardoon, which is a relative of artichoke. I am told that you can eat the leaves and the stems. The flowering head is not edible, I don't believe, but it is pretty. And I think it tastes sort of like artichoke, but I don't know because we are just planting these seeds right now. We're starting them indoors in pots, and then we will be moving them outside later this season. So this is one that you can start right now if you haven't tried it yet, just as an example. And if you're not familiar with it, they will get 3 to 5 feet tall and as much as about 6 feet wide. So you do want to give these some room in your landscape. But how cool. Your neighbors wouldn't even know that this was edible if you didn't tell them or offer them some to try. So let's keep going. We'll talk first about annuals. Partly because most of our vegetables we tend to grow as annuals anyway. So there are lots and lots of different options that we can use here in this category. And remember, our overall strategy to start with anyway is to use our foundation shrubs as the backbone and fill in with edibles around it. So there are different ways you can do that. You can do it with the vegetables like this daddle pepper over on the left side of the screen, Or you can even use flowers, but edible flowers. In the center on this slide, you see calendula. It is a really beautiful cool season flower. It is also known as pot marigold. You may know it by that name. I am told that early colonial settlers used the flower petals as a dye for their cheese and butter. Haven't tried it, but they say you can. And you can also use the flowers as garnish or on a plate or in a salad. And then over on the right, we have nasturtiums. It is a vining plant. Um, there are lots of different varieties, trailing, taller, everything in between. They have few pests, and you can eat the leaves, flowers, and even the seed pods. I'm told that you can pickle the seed pods and use them as you would capers. So all of these plants are examples of annuals that can fit in your landscape around your backbone. And they are, well, the two flowers especially are cool season. Peppers right now, it's a warm season crop, but we can kind of do a shoulder season. So if you already have some in the ground, you can probably get another good crop out of them. Once you get datil peppers really established, they may even overwinter if they are in sort of a warm microclimate and we don't have a severe winter. But I would still call them annuals for the most part. All right, let's talk about some perennials. Here is a good opportunity to use some herbs in your foodscape. In the top left corner, what you're seeing is Mexican mint marigold or Mexican tarragon. We like to use that here because the French tarragon really does not like our hot, humid summers. So it's not going to do as well. This Mexican mint marigold has a real similar flavor. You can use the leaves the same way you would French marigold, French tarragon, and it has the added benefit of these beautiful orange yellow flowers, and they are just starting right now. So this is a fall blooming perennial. Next to it, up here, you see what is African blue basil. That is a hybrid cross between two very different kinds of basil. It has a bit stronger flavor than our typical Genovese basils, but what it has going for it is a pollinator magnet. If you have not tried this, definitely do it. You can eat the leaves and you can pull in all the pollinators you'd ever want. You might be wondering, why does she have that on the perennial slide? And to me, this one is kind of like datil peppers. If they are in a warm microclimate, maybe the southwest side of your house blocked from northeast, northwest winds, they can overwinter, especially if they're in the ground and they have had a lot of time to get established before the winter cold hits. And then I also wanted to highlight there are some edible perennials that you can use in shady situations. If you have a shady yard or a lot of big oak trees or something like that, and you're thinking, oh, I can't get anything to grow underneath, you can probably get turmeric or ginger to grow underneath it. What you're seeing in this picture is mostly turmeric. There is one little leaf here of ginger showing, and that's the edible ginger, the ginger root, not an ornamental ginger. These are really nice for a kind of a leafy tropical look all summer long. They will die back in the winter, usually sometime around December-ish. So you got to plan for that, but they're very beautiful while they're there. And you can, of course, harvest some of those roots for cooking. Then they will come back, usually about the time I've decided, oh, they're probably dead. I guess they're not coming back this year. That's when they start coming back, maybe May or early June. Okay, let's keep going. we want to be sure we get everything in, don't we? Okay. There we go. We're on borders. So one of the key things for your foodscape is how are you going to keep this neat and making sure it looks like it's landscape and meant to be there. So one way to do that is create a nice edge. You can definitely do that with pavers, and you can also follow that edge with your planting. So on the left, right now in the cool season, a great border plant is lettuce of some sort. All different kinds of lettuces. Pick the one you most like to eat and plant it. You might want to start them indoors early in the fall because like right now, you know, we had a cool spell and now it's kind of getting hot again, and a lot of our lettuce isn't going to like that hotter, more humid temperature. So start them inside, and then once it's reliably cool, plant them out. Then all you have to do is harvest a little bit, especially the leaf lettuce, a little bit along and along, and you don't have to tear up your look all winter. In the middle, we have garlic chives. That's a taller border plant, but also very good. It'll fill in over time. It readily self-seeds, and it's a perennial. You can use the leaves for mild garlic flavor. And also for the cool season, we have Swiss chard. They're really beautiful, multicolored stalks. Harvest the leaves a little bit along and along, and you have a beautiful edible border. We also want to think about ground covers. Can anybody tell me what the ground cover on the left is? It's kind of tricky, even for you experienced gardeners.
You can put your answers in the chat.
Yeah, and my little notes at the bottom may give it away, but on the left, well, we'll talk about the right first. The right is showing a ground cover of Greek oregano around some bulbine. Some oreganos are a little too tall and frizzly looking to be a nice ground cover, but Greek oregano in particular is nice and prostrate, and it will fill in and smother weeds very well. On the left, our ground cover is sweet potato, and I know those leaves don't look like sweet potato. It is one that we grew last year at our demonstration garden, and I meant to look up the variety name, but I forgot, so I can't tell you the exact variety, but it is a sweet potato. And when I saw ornamental sweet potato vines for beds, I thought, well, why pick an ornamental one? Just pick a regular sweet potato whose leaf you like and plant that, let it go crazy, and then you get sweet potatoes too. We will move on to shrubs. So if you are building a new bed in your kind of zone 2 area between your foundation and the street, or if you just don't like the shrubs you do have, there are some edible options for shrubs. One in particular is pineapple guava. If you live at the beach or near the coast, this shrub can take a little bit more alkaline soils, which some of you may have. It's also tolerant of salt air, so it's a good choice for out at the beaches, and it does have very good fruits. I have planted this, but never got to actually eat any of the fruits yet, but I hear they're good. Blueberries, of course, make a good shrub, edible shrub. Just keep in mind that they are deciduous, so you want to put those where you have something around them that will give interest in the wintertime when they tend to look kind of like sticks. And then over here on the right, you will see what is a bay laurel or sweet bay. This is not sweet bay magnolia, totally different. This is a laurel, and it is the one that we can use the bay leaves for our cooking. It is susceptible to the ambrosia beetle, but I understand from our urban forester, Larry Feigert, that the ambrosia beetle does not seek out trees in the laurel family. It's just if it happens to land on them as it's being dispersed, your tree might be attacked. So you may or may not be able to grow this, but you can. It's a shrub or a small tree, and it should be winter hardy, especially if it's in the ground. All right, let's keep going. A few more shrubs to consider. On the left, we have pineapple sage, which is a salvia. You might not think of those as being shrubs, but this one really is if it's in a happy spot. It attracts hummingbirds and butterflies, and you can use the leaves in teas or things like that. It does have kind of a minty pineapple flavor. In the center, you see rosemary, and that is an excellent shrub for this area. If it's in the ground, it's probably going to make it through the winter. The only thing you have to watch is you don't want it to get too wet. So you wouldn't want to put it like right under a drip line on your house because that'll probably make it unhappy. It's very drought tolerant. Once it's established, you can let it go kind of natural the way it is here, or you can shear it into topiary forms or a rounded hedge if you like. And then on the right, you see a picture of roselle, which is related to hibiscus and okra, if that looks kind of that way to you. These are the calyces that are around the flowers, and these are used to make teas. It also, I understand, was used by early Florida settlers as a substitute for cranberry sauce. So it can also be referred to as Florida cranberry. And I understand that it is one of the key ingredients in red zinger tea.
I just planted some roselle and I'm very excited. I can't wait.
It gets very large. So this would be a shrub for kind of a back of the border sort of spot.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you might need some vertical accents in your landscape design. One you can use over here on the top is lemongrass. It is used for tea and also lots of different Asian dishes. It will get pretty tall. It can be taller than this looks, 3 to 5 feet tall and even wider. Here, this is something that Bree Arthur advocates for in your sort of zone 2 is grains. This in particular is oats, which we can grow here in the cool season, something that might be fun to try. You probably don't want to put a big, huge plot of this in because it's not going to be very easy to harvest by hand in a huge plot, maybe a small block. You can use corn in the warm season as a screen along the back of a border, maybe along the side of your property if there's something you don't really want to look at. Or you could also use sugar cane, which yes, does grow here. Be aware that its leaves are pretty sharp. So you don't want to put it next to a path where you're going to be hitting it all the time. It can get a little unwieldy, so this would be something definitely for maybe a zone 3 or at the back of your property. And then let's talk about trees. So you may already have trees in your landscape, but if you have a spot to put in some trees with edible fruits, I'm an advocate for that. They do double duty. On the left of this slide, you'll see some espaliered fruit trees. These are great if you have a very narrow space along a path or a walkway or a driveway. Ideally, you would like them facing south or southwest, but some trees that you can do this with pretty easily here are citrus and loquats. You can also do apples, peaches, and things, but those are a little bit harder because most of them need more chilling hours than we get. In the center, you see a fig tree. They do very well here generally, and if you like figs, I definitely recommend planting one in your yard if you can. They're pretty easy care. There is a fungal disease called fig rust that can affect the leaves, but often it does not affect the productivity of the tree. So what we do is about this time of year when the leaves are falling off and they're affected by the rust, we rake them up from underneath the tree, put some new mulch down, and just kind of try to keep the fig rust down to a dull roar. But so far, we get figs every season without problem. And then on the right, we have a loquat tree, which a lot of people are not as familiar with as an edible. You do see it in the landscape here. It has pretty kind of fuzzy orange yellow fruits on it. They taste really good. They are also known as Japanese plums, and they are definitely eaten a lot more in Asia and other parts of the world than here. But it does grow well, and it's an easy plant to grow. Okay, and then finally, containers. You may or may not have space for trees or shrubs or all of those things, or maybe you're not ready to make that big leap into foodscaping yet. You can definitely start with containers. And here you can go as crazy, as whimsical, or as formal as you want. It just depends on what your goal is for your landscape. Over on the left, you see more of a whimsical take, using children's wagons. Maybe it's a children's garden. You can mix any kind of ornamentals and edibles you like. You can do the same principle of thriller, filler, and spiller, and just insert the appropriate edible in whichever category you decide. Um, you can also do herbs in containers very easily. A lot of them are very happy in the unglazed clay pots, especially our Mediterranean herbs that like to be a little bit drier sometimes. I'm thinking of rosemary and thyme in particular, oregano. Those do very well in containers. And then on the right, you see an example of strawberries. Now is the time to be planting strawberries, and they do well in containers. You can also plant them in the ground, but one reason for putting them in containers is it helps keep the fruit off the soil, and that's a really important key to making sure that you're not spreading disease with your strawberries. So that's a very good way to grow them. Okay. And then finally, you also want to think about structures, just as you would in a purely ornamental landscape. Maybe you want an arbor to frame a walkway or a view. Well, instead of putting a purely ornamental plant on that, you could put some muscadine grapes on it, as you see in this picture here. Or maybe you have a view into your neighbor's backyard that you don't really want to see. So you can put up a trellis and you can grow ornamentals or edibles or both. You could put ornamentals on part of it and then fill in with edibles, either beans or cucumbers, or I'm sure there are other things I'm not thinking of, but those are two good ones. You can also use supports as kind of an ornamental feature. The sort of teepee approach to staking plants, and sometimes people will put a really pretty finial on top of that teepee. That can be really pretty even if you don't have any ornamentals right there and it's all edibles. It still gives it a dressed up look, like it's part of your landscape and you meant for it to look like that. Okay. So you might be asking yourself at this point, wait a minute, where are the tomatoes? Well, I love tomatoes, and I know everybody wants to grow tomatoes. The first thing I would say is right now is not the season to grow tomatoes. If you already have some planted, you may still be able to get a fall harvest, but we don't want to be planting them right now for the cool season. It's going to get too cool soon. So you're not starting them now. And second, if you want to grow heirloom tomatoes, most of those are indeterminate. And those are the ones that are going to keep growing and growing and producing if they're happy and well taken care of, but they're not going to look super pretty all season. So those I would recommend putting in the backyard probably. For your front yard foodscape, maybe you could focus on some dwarf or some more bush cherry type tomatoes, the determinants that you can put in a container, keep them pretty well controlled, and when they're mostly done producing, when the nights are getting hot in the late spring, then you can just yank that out and put something else in there. But I would put the indeterminate heirlooms in the backyard, unfortunately, as much as I love them.
All right, so we have definitely gotten a lot of questions over the last set of slides. So Damien, do you want to queue up some for Beth?
Sure, absolutely. There are a lot of questions are coming in, and I have to give some honorable mention to Brenda Daly, one of our Garden Club members and Master Gardener, she's been answering some of your questions along the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for doing that, Brenda. One of the big questions that we had was in reference to blueberries. When you mentioned blueberries, that they get, sort of like little sticks, when the winter comes, do you prune those?
There is pruning that you do in the winter time, and then some again in the summertime, and it's a little bit different by season. So yes, in the winter time, you're going to be pruning out some of the older, less productive canes and making sure that you have a nice open structure so that you can get good air circulation through the center of the plant the following growing season. But I think I have a link to a document from UF on the slide that has the blueberries, and there should be more information specifically how to do that in that document.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. One other question. A lot of questions came in about what can be planted in our area. Obviously, we have different soil. We talked about, some areas we were saying, false fall and second summer, as a friend of mine referred to it as. What do you have a recommendation, or is your desk drop going to provide some recommendations on what can be planted?
What I can do, and I didn't attach it to this presentation, but I can make sure everyone can be emailed a link to our Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide, which is UF's most basic, if you only have one document for growing vegetables in Florida, this would be it. It has everything you need to know about growing vegetables in a nutshell. And in a table, it has for all of the main vegetables, what season you planted in, whether you're in North, Central, or South Florida, how deep to plant it, the spacing that's required, what family it's in, varieties that are good to grow in Florida. So it has all of that kind of information. But in general, right now, we are starting our cool season vegetable crops, and those are things like the brassicas, kale, collards, mustards, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower. Soon it will be time for carrots, although not quite yet. It's still a little warm for those. Herbs like dill and parsley. What else? Those are the main things right now that I'm thinking of. So a lot of greens, and greens are actually really pretty easy to grow. So if you're one of the new gardeners, I would highly recommend starting maybe with some collards or some Swiss chard, something like that, that you can harvest a little bit along and along. They're very forgiving, very cold tolerant, and just all around great plants.
Thank you.
Beth,
Awesome.
one thing that people were asking is, are all the examples you're giving good for this zone? And
yes,
anything that isn't good for this zone. So you may just want to elaborate on that a minute.
So in general, if you're in Jacksonville, which I know maybe everybody's not since we're on Zoom, but if you're in Duval County, Florida or nearby, we are in zone 9, and that's a USDA hardiness zone. That is referring to our average minimum temperature in the wintertime. One thing some landscape and nursery companies are starting to do is differentiate between 9 South, which is us, and 9 West, which would be Southern California. Because even though by winter temperature we're both zone 9, our climates are very different, and a lot of the timing on planting and even some of the plants that we can grow well are different, because in California they have very dry summers and cool rainy winters, and we have very hot rainy summers, and so we're not the same. So USDA, we're zone 9. All of the plants that we've been talking about are things that we can grow here in this zone. If you're
Right.
not in zone 9, you want to refer to what zone you are in and then go by that.
Great. All right.
Okay.
That's part of our program here.
So just to kind of reiterate some of the strategies that we talked about at the beginning, again, start small. If you are just beginning your foodscape journey, don't try to do it all at once. And even if you develop an overall whole yard plan, think about how you can break that into phases so that you can do it a little bit along and along each season. You'll probably be more successful that way. Um, and again, use your evergreen ornamentals as your structure or your backdrop. Don't forget about using support structures for aesthetic appeal as well as their support. And then you can use unusual containers or planters or some kind of theme that will add a little bit of pop here and there. And remember, that can change from season to season. Or in your landscape bed, maybe you have a lot of low growing lettuce or ground cover, and then you have your shrubs and you want something in between, but you don't want a permanent something. You can use containers in your landscape bed too. That's another good way to add some visual interest and vary your height. Use hard edges and pathways as a way to define your spaces. I was listening to a presentation last year, I think, that Gail Hansen gave here at our extension office. She is a professor of environmental horticulture at UF, and she was actually looking at native landscaping. But I think foodscaping has some of the same potential barriers as native plants do in the landscape. There might be a concern among your neighbors or yourself or your HOA. Well, will foodscaping look messy or wild? Will it look different than my neighbors? Will it be difficult to maintain? Will it attract, vermin or critters or something? And those are things that we can help people learn through an education that may not be things you need to worry about, but also by following landscape design principles, we can show that foodscaping or native landscaping, whichever you're doing, doesn't have to be wild and messy and unkempt. It can be just as pretty as straight ornamentals. So something else to think about there. And as we always say at the extension office, if you've done other programs we do, right plant, right place. So when you're putting things, edibles into your beds, you need to be thinking about what are the watering and sun needs of those edibles, and do they match the conditions in that bed and the ornamentals that are already there. To be sure that you're putting like things together so that when you're watering, they're all getting the amount of water they need, or when you're fertilizing, they're all getting the amount they need, or they're getting the right amount of sun. And also, as we were just kind of talking about, right plant, right season. Don't try to go plant tomatoes now at this point in your landscape bed because it's a little bit too late to start that. So be sure you know what season to grow your edibles in. And then finally, you're really going to want to consider your existing irrigation layout. So if you're looking at your foundation beds, you may have those irrigation risers that kind of stick up above the shrubs and spray water out from above. Those will work, but there are some risks to that. They tend to leave water sitting on plant leaves longer, and that can encourage disease and fungal issues. So if you're able to convert to low volume, low flow irrigation, micro irrigation, drip tape, drip tubing, soaker hoses, something like that, all of your plants will probably be happier. And then if you are converting a portion of turf to a bed and you have those rotating turf spray heads, those are probably not going to be your best bet for your landscape bed. So you're going to have to figure out, am I going to cap off that turf head? Am I going to extend something from another landscape bed to the new one? It can get a little complicated. Or are you going to just say, well, I'll cap off that zone on my turf irrigation and rely on rainfall for that bed? So you've got some options there, but you do need to think about it. And just to be sure we all understand the rules too, especially for edibles in the front yard, there was a law passed by the Florida legislature in 2019 that states that no local government can keep you from growing vegetables in your front yard on a residential property. Now, there are some limitations to that. It only applies to food that you're growing for your family, so not something you're growing to, as a cottage industry to sell. Other regulations can still apply, like the irrigation and fertilizer ordinances or things on invasive species. There could be other laws that are passed about yards in general, and those would still apply, but they can't say that you cannot grow vegetables in your front yard. That's the local governments. But if you live in a homeowners association, you have voluntarily agreed to meet whatever their rules are. So if you do live in an HOA, you need to be sure you read through your HOA agreement and understand what their requirements are, because you do have to comply with that. So look that up. Talk to your HOA. If you have to submit a plan in advance, be sure you do that, and stay on the good side of your HOA. That said, this is also an opportunity to talk with your HOA, maybe show them what you're proposing, show them examples, pictures from other places, and maybe you can start helping to amend some rules if they are very restrictive, and show more people that they can grow at least some of their food in their own yard. Okay, Denise? And then the last thing we really need to think about is pest control. And because you may have a routine for your ornamentals, and you've got to really stop yourself and think about that before you start putting edibles in there. Because some chemicals that you might use on your ornamentals, you are not going to want to put on your edibles. At our demonstration gardens at the Extension office, we do not grow fully organically, but we do use integrated pest management. So the foundation of that is one, being sure you understand what pests or diseases are out there and how to identify them. Then you're using plants that are well adapted, that are resistant to diseases and pests as much as possible. You're using cultural methods to solve problems first, then biological, and only if all of those things don't work, then do you apply the least toxic chemicals that are out there. So be sure you understand what can be applied on your edibles and any waiting requirements for harvesting on those if you do use them.
And of course, there are many plants that you can put in that will attract pests away from the vegetables that you're growing as well.
Yes, yes, you can kind of do what's called trap cropping to keep things away from what you're trying to grow. So finally, to wrap it all up, because it's about 5 till 1, to some extent, foodscaping is mostly about changing your point of view. So if you look at the two pictures, they're both very formal gardens. They're both squares. They both have a water feature in the center and things radiating out from that. The one on the right, as far as I can tell, is purely ornamental. The one on the left is from the lower garden at Mount Vernon. They're both beautiful. One includes edibles, the other does not. So sometimes it's just about learning to see all the opportunities that were always there, but maybe we just didn't really see them before. So that is the presentation for today. I did want to highlight some resources. IFAS does have a website about foodscaping in general. Dr. Gail Hansen, who I mentioned earlier, has a document on designing your landscape with edibles. One of the leading authors since the 70s on edible landscaping is Rosalind Creasy. This is a copy of her, oh, maybe you can't see it with my background. Edible Landscaping, it's the new version of her book, and then this again is the Foodscape Revolution by Brie Arthur. If you're the person who likes to read gardening books at night in your spare time, I recommend all of those.
That's great, Beth. I know that we have a few more questions that have popped up, and we'll see if we can fit a few of those in before we wrap up for today. Damien?
Sure. One question I didn't answer. I did put a link in about pruning a lemon tree, but is it too late for okra?
Yes, okra is a great vegetable crop for us here, but it loves the heat. So we would start that in the spring and it'll go gangbusters all summer. If you already had some planted, it may still be going, but this is not the time that we would plant it right now.
And two more questions. Kathleen asked, she had been growing the loquats and it died over the last 2 years. Is there any disease possibly causing the root rot before she attempts to plant new ones?
They are susceptible to some disease whose name I can't think of at the moment, but I do know that they are growing well for the most part. Oh, it's a fungal disease called fire blight that can sometimes cause problems. I believe, yes, I do have a link to a UF document on loquat in the presentation. So when you get that, if you link to that document, hopefully that will answer some of your questions. But if not, please do feel free to reach out to me directly and I can try to help solve your individual problem.
And one more, Michael and Steve, or Michelle and Steve, my apologies. They grew chamomile and mint as a ground cover when they lived in Texas, or Kentucky, and want to know if they would grow well in this area.
Chamomile we tend to grow in the cool season, so you could do that here now. Mint is pretty happy in the spring and the fall. It'll make it through winter and make it through summer. So you could probably start some of that right now. My one caution on mint is, and I don't know if it's like this in Kentucky, but here, you better keep it in a container because if you don't, it is going to be everywhere in your yard. Maybe that's what you want. If so, you can just let it go in a bed, but it will be everywhere. And if you are from Kentucky, you can grow Kentucky kernel mint here, which I am told is the official mint of mint juleps at the Kentucky Derby.
Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. We're, this lunch hour is almost over, and I want to thank Beth for being an amazing source of information for this program and for the Garden Club in general. Thank you, Beth, so much for this time.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. I love talking gardens and hope I haven't yammered on too much.
And this is Beth's contact information. And Damien, you have that information that you can also place into the chat so that if somebody wants to get in touch, that they can. I want to remind everyone that this program is being recorded and will be available on the Garden Club's website probably by the end of the day, certainly by tomorrow morning, and we'll send out a reminder to everybody that it's there. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you, Beth. I do want to share a couple of messages from the Garden Club. One is that we're all in this crazy time period where masks are really necessary to keep everyone safe. And of course, the Garden Club has a mask for you. Damien will add a link to the chat where you can purchase a mask from the Garden Club. And your purchase goes directly to supporting the Garden Club's operations and programs just like this. We have a couple other programs coming up that we want to let you know about, and Damien will put the links to all of these in the chat. One is coming up just this Thursday. It's a Fun with Flowers program on fall bouquets. Chanel Lee of Living Beauty Florals will be giving the program, and it's 10 a.m. October 8th. All the spots for in person are taken, but you can watch the program online, and you can still check that out, so please do. We have our Nina Kummer birthday picnic coming up on October 16th. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be celebrating Nina's birthday, which is on October 16th, and be unveiling some really cool plans for the Garden Club and asking for your feedback. So please come and join us. We have our next horticulture program will be November 3rd, which is election day. So if you haven't voted, vote early, or vote either before this program or after, but please vote. It's a program with Tim Armstrong of Eat Your Yard Jax, and he'll be discussing how you can grow mushrooms at home. We have a fantastic program with artist Mindy Hawkins, who is also a Garden Club member, and she'll be talking about her work, which is inspired by gourds, and talking about how she was inspired by the art and history of gourds in her own work. That's November 12th. And we have a Fun with Flowers coming up on December 3rd, and you can make your own wreath and take it home and put it on your door or anywhere in your home. And we're doing that program twice, one during the day and one at night on December 3rd. So that's Sandra Foth of Anything with Plants. She is a fabulous designer and wedding planner, and it's going to be a fun program. So make sure you sign up for that. And the Garden Club really relies on the membership of people just like you. And if you are not already a member, we really would love to have you as part of our organization. It's not a lot to join, and it means so much to us. And you will be not only doing yourself a favor, but by giving yourself the information and entertainment and education and inspiration that you would like, but you'll also be doing a real solid for the Garden Club and keeping this organization strong. Grow with us. All right, we do surveys for all of our programs because we really want to hear from you about what you thought of this program and what kinds of programs you'd like to see in the future. So please take this survey. There will be a link in the chat, and we'll also send it out afterwards. So if you missed that here, we'll be sure to follow up with that. We really need to hear from you, so please take that survey. And once again, I'd like to thank the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund for making this program possible. And I want to thank all of you for being out there and being our audience. Otherwise, we would just be talking to each other, which is fun, but it's more fun to have an audience. I also like to thank my partner, Damien Lamar Robinson. Thank you, Damien.
You're so welcome. This was a fun. Always.
All right, everybody, have a great day, and go out there and foodscape.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for having me.